Good evening. On behalf of Jay Shah, Vice President and Head Cultural Outreach Mahindra Group, Teamwork Arts, Art Gyan and the Meta Secretariat, welcome back to the Mahindra Excellence in Theatre Awards and Festival. In life, you're given a test that teaches you a lesson. This past year has been a lesson for life as we grasp for air and learn to accommodate our lives around the new normal. The Mahindra Group has always been committed deeply to the arts. The arts need to be nourished and nurtured, as in art lies truth, conviction, talent and wisdom. Learnings at Meta is an extension of Meta's endeavour to nurture Indian theatre and build a community of practitioners dedicated to the craft. This year, we bring to you a series of masterclasses with our online arts educational platform, Art Gyan, in partnership with Bikaji, our snacking partner. Art Gyan is a web-based arts education platform striving to make the arts accessible and affordable to students across India and the world, while simultaneously providing professional artists with a structured platform to teach a wide network of learners. A very warm welcome to this masterclass at Learnings at Meta. Breaking the Fourth Wall with Quasar Thakore Padamsee. Used as a tool meant to trigger laughs in comedic plays, audience interaction can also be used as a plot device to push forward a social message by implicating the audience as witnesses. In this workshop, the participants will work on ways to forge connections with the audience with a focus on improvisation skills required to create an immersive theatre watching experience. Your mentor for the masterclass is none other than the brilliant Quasar Thakore Padamsee. Quasar is a theatreholic and lover of all things theatrical. Since 1999, he has directed and produced over 25 plays with QTP, including Every Brilliant Thing, A Peasant of El Salvador, Project Strip, So Many Socks, Minorities, and many others about contemporary social concerns. Internationally, he has worked on Tim Supple's A Midsummer Night's Dream and the aerial drama Mind Walking. He's a founding member of THESPO, a youth theatre initiative. He works as a lighting designer, a stage manager, leads workshops, and is a passionate crusader for the survival of theatre in the public consciousness. I have had the pleasure to watch many of Quasar's incredible works at Meta in the past. Do follow our social media handles to be notified of the upcoming masterclasses, conversations, play screenings, and the full schedule. Presenting to you, Breaking the Fourth Wall with Quasar Thakore Padamsee. Quasar, over to you.
Hi, welcome to Learnings at Meta. My name is Quasar or Q and I work for a company called QTP. It's quite wonderful that we're able to do this, especially in a pandemic, and that's the wonderful thing and amazing thing about initiatives like Art Gyan, which is providing an online platform to just engage with the arts in some way, in some meaningful way. So whether you're interested in music or dance or theatre, clearly this is the place to be. So like I said, my name is Quasar. Most people call me Q. I work for an organization called QTP, and we've been a theatre company for a number of years, almost 2 decades now. And we're kind of obsessed with live performance, by doing things live, by creating a special unique live experience for our audiences. And while we have done many conventional plays where actors are on one side and the audience on the other, a lot of our newer work has actually been about engaging audiences in a more meaningful way, trying to redefine what theatre is, and that's really what excites us in that way. So today we're going to talk about the fourth wall, and really look at what does that mean and how do we kind of break through that and break out of that. The fourth wall is a really interesting concept. It's actually not very old if you look at the history of theatre. It's only, about 200 years old. And it came about from a very, very specific kind of performance space. And that is the proscenium theatre. Now, the proscenium theatre is where there is a stage, the audience sits on one side, and the actors perform. Now, it wasn't always like this. I mean, there've been many kinds of theatres, and it wasn't always fourth wall. But fourth wall came about because of an era called naturalism, which ordinarily we just talk about trying to make things as real as possible, as lifelike as possible. So, for example, if the curtain opened and you saw a drawing room, it looked exactly like a drawing room. From the paintings hanging on the wall, from the walls at the back, from the on the table, the way the tablecloth was laid, everything was really, really specific and naturalistic, as natural as it could possibly be. And therefore, the concept of fourth wall came about, which is the fact that when the curtain goes up, it reveals what is happening inside the house and inside people's lives. And therefore, the curtain was called the fourth wall, almost. So you had three walls on stage, and a fourth wall got lifted up, and an audience could look in, could peer in, could witness, could eavesdrop into the action. Now, this came about because a lot of the way that work was being created on stage became that it should not be disturbed. Now, some of it comes from our own religious baggage. When we have a preacher or a priest or someone up there, you don't disturb the priest. There's a certain hallowedness to it. So the fourth wall as an idea became that what was on stage was almost untouchable. So you could witness it as an audience member, but you couldn't participate in it. You couldn't influence it in any way. It was a wonderful thing. For those of you who have watched shows, especially these days or just before the pandemic, and mobile phone rings go off, there is nothing more annoying to an actor and other audience members than that level of disturbance. And the fourth wall technique is a little bit like that. It was almost like what you're watching on stage is a piece of art, and you're watching it and you're witnessing it. And yes, there is a give and take in terms of reactions and feeling, but there is no influence of the audience on the action. The action happens in all. So if you're thinking of the work of Bernard Shaw or Oscar Wilde or even Arthur Miller, a lot of our modern kind of writers, your John Osborne, etc., they all came out of this naturalistic school of theatre, right? Which the stuff that was happening on stage was pristine and whatever. Interestingly, that relationship where the audience cannot influence what's happening on stage, and audience is on one side and the actors are on another side, is what our cinema now does so well. They try and create the real worlds of what they are talking about, right? And they really make it very, very naturalistic. It's very difficult to recreate the almost authenticity of a cinema kind of production on stage, because it's so detailed and they're able to and now with CGI you can do whatever the hell you want. So that level of authenticity has transferred from theatre to cinema. Interestingly, a lot of the rules of what we know of all performance arts, whether it's the television, whether it's OTT platforms, whether it's, the theatre or whatever, actually comes very much from this kind of rule. So the audience gets to witness the action. What is happening on stage, they are witnessing. But this wasn't always the case. The first man went out, saw woolly mammoth, came back, wanted to tell people about it, and he went, hey, I saw woolly mammoth, it ran like this, I chased it. He was telling a story. The moment he started telling a story, people sat around to listen to what is the story, what is this experience that he's sharing, what is the insight that we're learning about ourselves. And that was the first performer. That was the first storyteller, that was the first theatre person. And at that time there was a question and answer. Oh really, how big is it? And that's how, stories evolved, and that's how over time it has evolved to where we are today, where we now have all these various kinds of things. Now, one of the interesting things is that, like I mentioned with the fourth wall, the actors are pretty much on one side and the audience is on another. And by and large, when we talk about the fourth wall, or we talk about naturalism, naturalistic theatre, the actors are on one side of the audience. But there have been many other kinds of theatres and kinds of performances, and they all can or cannot adhere to the rules of the fourth wall. And remember, the rules of the fourth wall are very simple. It's about the audience not disturbing what happens on the action, and there is no direct address. What do I mean by direct address? Hamlet, to be or not to be, the soliloquy, that's a direct address. Hamlet is talking directly to the audience. If you've read a play called The Glass Menagerie, for example, by Tennessee Williams, even though it's a modern play, Tom is standing on stage talking to an audience, right? He goes, yes, I have tricks in my pocket, I have things up my sleeve. He's directly telling the audience, I didn't go to the moon, I went much further. For time is the longest distance between two places. He's talking directly to the audience. All our folk forms have a narrator or a sutradhar, whether in India or around the world. They all have someone who comes in, bangs a drum or makes some noise and tells you the story. Oh, let me tell you the story of Ram, and Ram turns up, and let me tell you, and then he met this. That's all direct address. They're talking directly to the audience, therefore there is no fourth wall. And in modern theatre, we now kind of shuttle between having a fourth wall and not having a fourth wall and having our choice. So rather than talk directly to the audience, right, I can talk directly to the audience and then go into a scene and talk to my fellow actor. And then we can talk to our fellow actor and you're witnessing that. And then at some point I can turn to you and make a comment. Now that actually comes from very much folk theatre. So there was a movement in the medieval period, in Italy actually, is where it gets rooted at, in a troupe called Commedia dell'arte, or a style, I wouldn't say a troupe. And they were troupes of people, they were groups of people that would go around performing. And they had very special rules. Some of the characters were completely naturalistic. Well, not naturally, but they were completely engrossed in what they were doing. They couldn't interact with the audience. There was one character, Arlecchino, who was allowed to go and hang out with the audience, talk to the audience, pass judgment on the action that's happening. And Arlecchino then became Harlequin, which is now the precursor to our modern day clown. When I say Harlequin, I don't mean Harley Quinn, the DC Universe lady. No, not that, although that is also inspired, as is the Joker and whatever. But Harlequin or Arlecchino was this prankster who was able to play with the audience, keep things live and light. Shakespeare's clown is a direct descendant from that. By Shakespeare's clown, I mean, in a lot of plays you will find, like in As You Like It, there's Touchstone, or in King Lear, there's the Fool. You have this one character that is actually able to pass comment on what is happening, and the audience sides with that character. And that really was from that. So there was not this area of performance and you couldn't impinge on it. There were actors who were allowed to go into the audience. A great example today in cinema is probably Deadpool. As you can see, I'm obsessed with comics, but Deadpool is a great example because at some point he's in the middle of a fight, he turns, he talks to the audience, he looks at you, he tells you, isn't this weird? And then he goes back to it. So that's breaking the fourth wall in a cinematic context. A more serious version of that would be something like House of Cards, where the character constantly is telling the audience about what he's going to do or what he's likely to do, or stuff like that. And so the breaking of the fourth wall is when you create when you suck an audience in and we start believing what is happening, and then suddenly it breaks through. It suddenly breaks out and you pass comment on the action, or you connect with an audience, or you ask an audience something. This was very interestingly used in the 20s, 30s and 40s, and well, all the way up to the 50s even, by a gentleman called Bertolt Brecht. Now, what had happened with naturalistic theatre, with this theatre where there is just the two of us and you're witnessing, is people got very emotionally invested and involved in what was happening. And that was absolutely fine, and that's absolutely wonderful. But what Brecht wanted, or Brecht, or Brecht, or however you want to pronounce it, what he wanted was people to think. So he actually went around and studied Asian folk forms. And he discovered that this concept of breaking this and talking directly to the audience was quite a powerful way to get an audience to think about something, to get an audience to actually reflect intellectually on the action that happens. So he called these alienation techniques. I don't think they were the right term, because alienation means actually to push away. But I find that oftentimes breaking the fourth wall actually is doing the opposite. It is asking the audience to further engage with the piece, perhaps in a different way, but further engage with it in a different way. So Brecht basically tried that and was very, very successful in shaping how modern theatre happens. So if you think about a lot of our agitprop kind of theatre, which is agitation and propaganda theatre, which is street plays, for example, right? Street plays are done very much to an audience, very much in a conversation to people. You're constantly saying, look at this, this is what's happening in our society. There is constantly that asking them to look from your point of view. And that's very much a precursor to Brecht and his kind of techniques and the kind of techniques that he studied. A lot of our folk forms have it. A lot of our folk forms. Tamasha, for example, they come out, they sing a song to the audience at the beginning itself, and then they tell you what's going to happen, and they show you what's happening. Then the sutradhar or the commentator comes out and talks to the audience. So that whole sense of don't disturb the action, it's hallowed, still remains to some extent. But there is this constant breaking of the device that what the action that's happening is happening somewhere else, and we are just getting a zoom view into that. So like I said, there are multiple types of stages. So the proscenium, or actors on one side, audience on one side, is one. There's something called the thrust, very interestingly. So prosceniums are mainly most of your college auditoriums, your kamanis, your big commercial auditoriums. The advantage that they have is that they can seat many, many people, but someone close to the action and someone really, really far. And that also led to more and more of this, the fourth wall is hallowed ground kind of thing happening, because the more people you have, the more chance of distractions. But you need more people because the economics of theatre requires it. It's easier to cram in more people if you have the actors on one side and the audience all the way there. And also there's this hangover from the religious kind of way that we look at performance and look at art. So so that's audience on one side, people on the other. Then there's something called the thrust. There aren't too many thrust theatres in India. Rang Shankara in Bangalore is one option, but probably the best option is the Prithvi Theatre in Bombay. And it's called a thrust because that same stage then thrusts into the audience, and the audience then suddenly envelopes the stage. So suddenly the audience is on three sides of the acting area. Again, the reason I'm mentioning this is because this can still be fourth wall performance. It can still be where the actors are just talking among each other and the audience is looking in, and then you have the choice where you can break the fourth wall and have a conversation. Then of course you have audience in the round, so audience is surrounding the action, so that's four-sided. And while the experience is unconventional, when you walk into a theatre or a performance which is four-sided, you're like, hey, wait a minute, there's no set, there's no background, because the background is the other audience member on the other side. So it's all slightly different. But it also allows for that concept of witness much greater. You're suddenly witnessing something much more. And there was a production of a lovely play called The Father, which is now a movie with Anthony Hopkins in it. But Nasiruddin Shah played the same character, and it was done in Bombay and elsewhere as a theatre in the round. So the audience on all four sides. And it was a great example of an honest, naturalistic storytelling which we could not influence. Yes, we got the bonus of seeing someone else's reaction to the action. So you see another audience member respond to something, and that's lovely. And that's why I personally love playing in the round. But you also got the sense that you couldn't impinge on it. There was no breaking of the fourth wall. At no point did they turn around and talk directly to the audience. This was a world and stuff was happening in it, and it was fascinating. It was a little bit like like you're watching a laboratory experiment. The energy is all the way in the center. Everyone is watching around. Some street theater is like that. It creates that energy when people surround the action. Except street theater does the same thing, but then breaks it out and talks to an audience. And then you have a slightly rarer kind of thing, which is the audience on two sides. Not many venues can have that. Some of the black boxes in Bombay, G5A, the NCPA experimental, Padatik in Calcutta, I think even Oddbird when it was around could do that in Delhi. So there are a few spaces around the world. The new place called The Box in Pune, where you can actually split the audience into two and you have them on either side and you have action in the middle. Now, the reason I'm saying this is that this concept of the pristine, hallowed performance area where the actors don't talk directly to the audience can happen irrespective of where the audience is seated. Each kind of style can have that. Even promenade theatre. Promenade theatre is where the audience moves from location to location. So you could start, let's say, in the drawing room of a house and then you walk up to another place and another place and another place. But if the action, so for example, we saw a show at a nightclub called Mykonos many years ago in Bombay, and they basically had action happening in different corners of this nightclub. So the audience kept turning and looking, and then you're looking at a scene over here, and then suddenly something happens behind you, and you turn around, and now you're looking at a scene over there. And what was fascinating about it is they never directly talked to us. I mean, there were monologues that happened, but they never actually talked to us or addressed us or said, hey, look at us. There was no sutradhar, there was no guide through the experience. Stuff was just happening, and it was like an art exhibition. You went and looked at things happening, but ordered art exhibition. It was kind of a guided experience. So even a promenade piece, right, where the audience is moving from place to place, even that can hold that sanctity of the actors are not talking to the audience and the audience is not talking to the actors. You can hold on to that sanctity, and it's quite wonderful and quite remarkable. So these kind of things happen. So this sanctity concept happens a lot. How do you break that, right? How do you look at something and you set up a certain convention and then break it? It's very interesting. Earlier on, it was just about actors talking to the audience, actors engaging with the audience, actors talking directly to an audience and saying, hey, this is happening, or look at this is, what the events that are happening, or what do you think, should I'm feeling conflicted, or whatever. The insides of the actor or the character would come out. In modern times, that has changed a little bit, or rather, it's changed quite a lot. Because now what's happening is the audience is no longer just witness. The way that the modern plays and the playwrights are working is actually to almost break the mold a little bit. So you break the mold by actually now taking off the do not disturb sign and actually asking the audience to disturb, or rather to participate in what is happening. in case some of you know of the improv style called playback theatre, that's a great example of this. But that is still slightly random. It's not as scripted or sculpted as what I'm talking about. There's a play that we've done recently called Every Brilliant Thing. And it's a remarkable piece because it's one actor on stage, but on any given night, up to 50 people from the audience are required to say something or the other. And 4 or 5 are actually asked to come up onto stage and stand with the actor and have the conversation and actually be part of scenes. What does this do? One is, it kind of makes it a much greater engagement, because suddenly the audience is not this faceless mass in the black of the night. The audience is every single person. So the actor is actually looking at every single person as he works his way through. In our production, as he works, but it could be a he or a she or anyone. So it stops making the audience anonymous. Everybody suddenly has an identity. The second thing that it does, which is wonderful, is it makes every performance completely different. The performer is the same, but because 5 of the audience members are absolutely brand new every night, and the rest of the audience is brand new, the change from show to show to show to show is quite remarkable. It's the same story, but it is quite remarkable how the show changes performance to performance. And that's one of the wonderful things, and that's one of the obsessions that I have and we have as theatre people, is how do we make this particular performance, singular performance, special for that singular audience, right? How do we get them to experience something that nobody else will? That's one of my obsessions, I will be honest. Every Brilliant Thing is written by a wonderful British playwright called Duncan Macmillan. And he wrote it in conjunction with a stand-up comedian called Johnny Donahoe, who actually played the part the first time. And it's a remarkable piece of writing in the way that it's devised. And they worked very, very hard to create an atmosphere where an audience member felt comfortable enough to come up and participate. There are other kinds of ways. There's a lovely playwright called Nasim Sulaimanpur from Iran, and he actually captures liveness in the same way, and again breaks the fourth wall, as it were, in the same way, which is quite remarkable, because every night has to be a new performer performing the play. It's a one-man show, or in theory a one-man show. The actor has to know nothing about the play and receives the text on stage. And they rip open an envelope and they pull out the text and they read the text. So it's literally like you're reading the writer's words for the first time. So you're, as a performer, discovering it the first time, and the audience is discovering it the first time, which leads for an incredible energy, and it's incredibly special because it's the first time anyone's ever said these words, or that actor has ever said these words. And the audience therefore gets to witness that. But there's also a great amount of audience participation. He's constantly asking the audience for stuff, for advice, for things. Some of them come up on stage, some of them have something to do. So it is structured improv in that way, but it is quite remarkable by the fact that show to show to show is completely different. It's completely different. And there are many theatre makers around the world that are really looking at that. And the way that they're able to do that is to break through that artifice, or that wall, or that curtain where we are a performance and this is how it's going to be. Whoever you are, it doesn't matter. Now the audience, who the audience is, does matter. And I think part of this thought and part of these things are coming about because the theatre is the oldest of all the performing art forms. And by performing arts, I mean, cinema, television, OTT platforms, web series, whatever. And the cinema and the theatre is the oldest of it. And as new technologies have come in and taken the rules of theatre and placed it in a certain way, theatre has had to evolve and find new ways. So bizarrely, theatre is the oldest of all art forms, but it's also the newest of all art forms because it keeps reinventing itself. And the liveness of theatre, the touch, the feel, that sense is quite remarkable today, in today's day and age. it is quite fantastic with where a lot of theatre makers and playwrights are taking this this way away. So, for example, a Deadpool turning and talking to the audience is great, but the audience has no influence on the action that's happening, right? It's not like they could alter what was going to happen. But in something like Every Brilliant Thing or something like even White Rabbit, Red Rabbit, they do have some influence in what happens. May not be large plot points, but they have some influence in how that particular show will go. That one performance will never be recreated. So the people that have watched it have witnessed something unique and is unrepeatable. And that's quite wonderful. I mean, I was talking about The Father, which was done in the round, and it's immaculate, but it's been translated into a film and quite easily. One of the wonderful things about breaking the fourth wall and having an audience. So earlier on, it was the actors that were breaking the fourth wall by going that way, and I think now people are going the other way, where you're actually inviting the audience to break the fourth wall and come in. And that's very exciting, and that's very, very interesting with regards to what's happening. So it's more participation over being a witness, and that's a huge difference in how things happen. So Father, for example, easily translated into a wonderful piece of cinema. Every Brilliant Thing or White Rabbit, Red Rabbit can't. It's not possible because it is so dependent on the people in the room. Now, there is something, I mean, for me, why I think that breaking the fourth wall is really important is because, unlike the other art forms, for me, the theatre is a communal experience. It's an experience where the community of the audience is one community of audience. And I found that more so now during lockdown, when we've tried to do digital performances and things like that. When we watch, for example, if you go to the cinema, you're almost being cut out from other audience members, right? Your seats are big and deep, you don't see another audience member. The cushioning is quite wide and thick, you can barely hold your date's hand. And if you're looking at earlier on, television used to be a community activity. The whole family would sit in the living room and watch one. Now everyone has a TV in their own bedrooms and now in different rooms. So your cook has one television, your grandparents have one television, you have one, everyone. And now that it's gone to the phone, it's even more. You could be two people watching the same thing, but you're watching them on your device. So the performance to audience relationship has become more and more 1:1. Theatre is the only one where it's still 1:many, and that's very, very important, where the theatre people audiences feel like they are a community. You enjoy the play more based on how someone else is responding. So if there's laughter, it spreads through the audience. If there's shock or fear, it spreads through the audience. So I think that's one of the reasons why the way that the modern playwrights or the current playwrights and theatre makers are breaking the fourth wall is they're reaching out, grabbing an audience and bringing them onto stage and into being participatory in what is happening, and therefore having an influence on it. I find this very important because, especially today, where we have been locked down now for quite a while, I think there is a time that will come where we will go back to needing to experience something as a community. It's very interesting that today, if you go to the grocery store and someone coughs, and even though they're behind the mask, you're watching everyone with a certain amount of suspicion, certain amount of danger. Are they trying to give me COVID? Are they okay? There's a certain wariness that is there. It's in the back of the mind, whether we like it or not. And I think the theatre is one of the few places where we come together as a group and we watch someone with genuine curiosity, and then we get up and we participate in that. And I think breaking the fourth wall, and I also think that the theatre has a huge role to play in our emotional healing when we all come back. How we can trust each other again, trust random people again, just to be curious about them and generous about and watch them with generosity. and I think that this new breaking through, people seeking connection, is very, very, very important. I mean, just as an aside, it was kind of odd, but the short time that things did open up in Bombay, the restaurants were full, the theatres not so much to begin with, and that's because everyone was tired of being passive, and I think it's because people were tired of being passive and receiving. I mean, you were doing that on Netflix, you were doing that on from the television or whatever, and people were going to restaurants because that's where you were sitting across someone and actually having a conversation. So I think that these new ways of breaking the fourth wall and connecting with the audience is the way to go, and it is very important in our timeline now. Now, there are multiple ways of breaking the fourth wall. Remember, a soliloquy is one way. You suddenly turn and you talk to an audience or a sutradhar, or you guide them through the action. Bringing an audience up is another. But breaking the fourth wall is all about actually connecting with your audience. That's the basic rule. And sometimes you recruit them and you ask them to be part of the show, right? Which is wonderful. There's another theatre maker called Tim Crouch, for example, and he does, again, incredibly participative work. The other is to touch people. What are the things that no other media can do? I can touch. As a performer, I can touch an audience member physically. I can touch them. We did a show called A Peasant of El Salvador, and there's a lovely moment in that where the Archbishop comes to this little town and is talking to people, and the way that we've staged it is that scene actually happens in the middle of the audience, and he's talking to people and he's saying, what has happened, and have you lost land, and who has been killed, and all of that. And at the end of the scene, he says, let's pray. And he's an archbishop. And the actors and the archbishop, the guy who's playing the archbishop and a couple of the actors who are in the play, they then go and take the hands of our various audience members. And then they all just pray together. And what does it do? It stops making the play far away. Stops making the play being in El Salvador in the 1980s. It brings it to the here and now, and that immediacy, the fact that we are now in this place, is quite powerful, and I think it's a huge tool with regards to theatre making and creating work, where that can happen. Smell is another lovely thing. Smell cannot be replicated with any other medium. There was a lovely show that happened at Serendipity, which is a festival that happens in Goa, where it was in complete darkness, and the performance was literally just a group of, I think, 8 audience members, and this lady's telling this story, and as she's telling the story, she opens up the smell of different foods that she's talking about. And that's a unique, incredible experience, and smell triggers so many memories for all of us. The smell of a flower, the smell of a perfume of an ex, for example, the smell of things that you suddenly remember from your childhood. I remember, the smell of a chatai, for example, and then many years later when you smell that again, you're going, hey, it triggers off another feeling. So smell is a great trigger for memory and feeling. And that's another thing, that's another way that you can actually break the fourth wall. And in fact, you can use that to break the fourth wall without officially breaking the fourth wall, if you know what I mean. We did a show called Wild Track, which is quite remarkable in the fact that it is a very difficult play because it goes back and forth in time. You have to really pay attention, and there is no breaking of the fourth wall in terms of the actors addressing the audience or the audience participating. It's written by a lovely man called Argya Lahiri and directed by him. But there's one scene in the middle of that where they make coffee on stage. She gives him a coffee machine, and they're figuring out how to make coffee. And I cannot tell you the change in the entire audience and auditorium when that coffee begins to brew and the smell of the coffee starts hitting the audience, right? Everyone kind of goes, and it really is lovely, and that is a way to break the fourth wall without ever actually direct addressing or talk to that. You've gone off the stage and involved the audience and activated a sense and therefore a feeling and an emotion and a memory that they ordinarily wouldn't have access to. So it is really quite remarkable what breaking the fourth wall can do in terms of engagement, in terms of getting the audience involved. There are the conventional ones, talking directly to an audience, having an audience member, an actor pop up in the middle of an audience, for example. It's a great device. It's used, many times, where the actors don't realize that, or the audience doesn't realize that this person sitting here is an actor, and then they get up and they get involved. Of course, that has its downsides. There's a lovely story of the 1974 production of Jesus Christ Superstar, where the first 2 or 3 rows, I think, were all dancers who were dressed as audience members. And then when Christ arrives in Jerusalem, there's a song which is, Christ, you know I love you. Did you see I wave? I believe in you and God, so tell me that I'm saved. And there's a character called Simon Zealotz, and he says there must be over 30,000. And these 3 rows of audience jump up and get up onto stage. So it really feels like the auditorium has come alive. And even though I'm sitting in the audience and I'm not one of those people who's jumping up on stage, I feel like we are all part of this celebration. It's an incredibly visceral experience. Of course, it has its downsides, because sometimes there are audience members who don't realize that they are all actors and they jump up on stage and suddenly, the choreography is, Christ, I know I love you. Did you see how there's one guy, going all over the place kind of thing. So yeah, it does have its drawbacks, and that's the wonderful thing about the theatre. It is live, so actors have to respond to it. You have to make sense out of it. You have to make it kind of happen. So there are ways like things appearing from the audience. If any of you have ever been to the Kingdom of Dreams, the Nautanki Mahal in Gurgaon, they've got all sorts of devices that break the fourth wall. People flying overhead, landing in the audience. Whatever you can, everything to create a more visceral experience. Remember, I come back to the fact it's about connecting. It's about really engaging further with the material, instead of us just becoming a passive viewing experience. Remember, I talked about Brecht earlier on. One of the things that he didn't want was that an audience member is just watching and gets passive and therefore doesn't think. So he basically called it an alienation technique, where instead of all being passive, something breaks, and that creates an intellectual response. The same kind of rules apply even now, but like I said, it's more about increasing that engagement. So just when an audience gets complacent and is sitting there and is calm, something happens that changes that, that breaks that. And there are various formats to it. There was a lovely play called Geli 21 Varsh in Marathi, written by Dharmakirti Sumant. And that has so much audience address. He talks directly to the audience right through it, and then he tells you his story. And his story is the struggle with mental health and the pressures of exams, and in his head he goes to Raghu of roadies for support, because that's the only role model he has as a young man. And it is fantastic. And then he steps out and he has this conversation with the audience, and he has a conversation actually with the sound guy who's sitting in the audience. So it feels like he's having a conversation with the audience. And these are all methods and techniques to break out the complacency of an audience, to keep us on our toes as an audience and go, oh wow, something's happening. It's that there is, and the fact that this cannot be replicated. It's unique. It is unique to this experience, and this experience only. I mentioned Peasant of El Salvador on the Praying. We do one scene where one of the guards actually goes up into the audience and starts questioning people. And there's a scene where he sees this very pretty girl, and he says, will you tell me who the leader is? Will you snitch on them? And usually it's an audience member who's like, no. And he goes, sweetheart, tell me. Or, If you tell me, then I'll tell my guards to leave you alone. And it's such a horrific moment, right, in the history of this country, where that was the kind of power that the soldiers had. And it makes that girl squirm for a little bit, but makes the entire audience squirm. I mean, most of the time the person who's being picked on is a little bit self-conscious and shy and giggly and all of that, but it makes everyone else feel really worried. Now that can only happen when you talk to an audience directly, when you actually speak to people, and that's really the power of breaking the fourth wall. It's quite a unique kind of thing. And that's why I think that the way forward to create that liveness, to create that experience, and the fact that breaking the fourth wall is now a two-way street. Earlier on, it was a one-way street. Actors would break the fourth wall, talk to the audience. And today, in modern theatre or in contemporary theatre right now, it's the other way around as well. You reach out and you pull someone from the audience in. And I think that's the way it's going to go. And I think that's the way theatre will redefine itself as being a really special live medium. It's not to say that there aren't other ways for theatre to be live and a unique experience. Theatre in the Round, for example, like I talked about The Father, or even one of our own shows called So Many Socks, which is about Tibetan refugees, which was performed in the Round. But at no point did the actors ever address the audience or ever invite the audience in. They did their thing, and it was as fourth wall as anything else, where you're just watching this action happen in this circle, and you're witnessing this action without any connection with it. But that experience, it struggles to be replicated on another medium, because the circle and being in the round and that whole experience is so intrinsic to the show, to the play. And it's a lovely play written by Annie Zaidi, and when you read it, it's a difficult play to kind of comprehend. But when we put it up and it had its beautiful moments. In fact, we did it for Meta as well, which was quite lovely. So I mean, that brings me to the end of my rant, because unfortunately I would love for some kind of connection and conversation, which brings me to the fact that actually, if you do have questions about this, please send us an email. The description is the email address to write to is in the description below. Happy to reply, respond, chat, about these things. I'm a little bit obsessed with the theatre, so any conversation about the theatre I'm game for. Also, if you are stuck in lockdown and you are kind of trapped, use the time. Attend stuff on Art Gyan like you are today. Talk to other people about it, because maybe the stuff you know, maybe the stuff you don't know, but it's a good way to stay engaged. And secondly, also try and watch some work. There's some fantastic work happening out there. Some of it is tweaking the theatre for the online medium, and others is just plays that were on stage, have been reinvented, have been captured, and are being streamed. Meta, in fact, are doing a bunch of them, and there's a lot of interesting work from around the country that's actually being showcased, which otherwise you wouldn't ordinarily get to see. And I think some of them are even archival, so it means that those shows are actually shut down, so those productions don't exist, and therefore you get a sense to educate yourself and see more things. Be hungry, see more stuff. It's really, really important, because no matter who you are, where you are, what you're doing, the way to keep current and keep working is very, very important. Inspiration is secondary. How I want to create work is a separate thing. But building of skills is something that can happen constantly and can keep happening. So I think art, platforms like Art Gyan are a great opportunity to do that. If you are looking to get a career in the theatre, I heartily recommend it. But also to note that it's not quite a career in the same way. Like with any career, the first 3 years are hard work, whether you're an actor or a stage manager. If you're a young person who wants to get involved, there are incredible initiatives. THESPO, which, full disclosure, I have something to do with, but there are also others. Just write in to people like that. and try and get some kind of engagement on it, and start now, even if it's part-time. Start now, because just as engineering takes 5 years to do, so does getting, getting regular work in the theatre. It takes time to develop those conversations, develop those skills, be strong enough so that when opportunities come, you are good enough to take that. The theatre is a wonderful place. I spend my entire life there. I love it. I love interacting with people in a live way, which is ironic to say when we're doing this over, a digital way. But if I could reach out and touch you and hold your hands and, all of that in a socially distanced world, I would. But what the theatre has taught me, and it's a very human medium. It's a medium about people, both on stage and the way we work, and in the audience. And when we tell the stories, we're telling it to human beings, and we're responding to it. I don't know if any of my work has made the overriding, theatre scene better. I don't think that has happened. But I do know this: the theatre has made me better as a human being, as a person. The things I've studied about, the things I've learned about, other people, the way people think, some of the stories that I ordinarily would never have had access to, I have had access to because I work in the theatre. So I recommend it highly as a career option. But remember, it is tough work, it is hard work. Like with anything, the first few years are a drudge, and it's a sacrifice. It's a different kind of lifestyle. It's not the same as getting a job on a call center and having high disposable income. It's about sacrifice, it's about working hard, but the joy of performing, the joy of when you do something and it matters to people, that is unparalleled, and I wouldn't trade that in for anything. Like I said, if you have questions, just put them in the email. Questions, comments, you just want to chat, vent, whatever, it doesn't matter, just do it. Again, thank you to Meta and Artgyan for making this happen. It's been a lot of fun. And yeah, I hope you guys watch some work. I hope you stay in the theatre. I hope everyone out there who's listening to this, or it's a 1:1 medium, so I hope that you who are listening to this alone, in your room, on your phone, on your laptop, wherever you're watching this, I hope you spend some time in the theatre as a creator, as a performer, as a stage manager, as an audience member. Engage with us. We're a fun bunch of people, and I promise you it will change your life in a little bit. Thank you very much, and have a safe pandemic for the rest of it. Please stay safe and wash your hands and sanitize properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Quasar, for this enlightening session. It opened up many vistas of technique and thought for our attendees. Once again, we would like to thank the Mahindras for their unstinted support for the arts. A big thanks to Bikaji, our snacking partner for Meta 2021. And thank you all for being great participants. If you like this masterclass, do spread the word and register on Artgyan to explore more such courses. Currently, the platform features courses by expert artists across 7 streams: art, music, dance, theatre, wellness, food, and literature, with a variety of substreams under each, from Hindustani vocals to folk instruments, and from baking to dance therapy. All these masterclasses will be available to view later on our Meta Facebook page and YouTube channel. Thank you once again.